Well, Roxana, it's great to sit and chat to you.
Absolutely.
We do know each other quite well, so we'll be sharing information that we know. Roxana, you've been in leadership positions across Europe, and now you're in the United Kingdom. I'm Chief Executive of CARE, and you're now working for us at CARE. So it's really exciting, I think, to share some of our ideas on leadership, because we've been in different situations, haven't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one of the exciting things is the fact that we have known each other for 8 years.
Yes.
And, 8 years ago, I came for the first time at the European Leadership Forum, and
Yes.
I signed up for mentoring, as one does when,
Yeah.
they come for the first
Yes.
time to the ELF. And of course, by God's, divine accident or divine coincidence, you were the mentor that was assigned to me back then, 8 years ago.
I remember it well.
Yes, me too, me too. And it's so beautiful and fascinating to see how that relationship grew with time, and that, now we work together. It's
Yes.
quite exciting.
Yes.
And I have been thinking, of course, you have been the CEO of CARE for over 15 years. That's
Yes.
a huge amount of experience. So would you say that leaders are born or made?
I think it's both. I think there's something about leadership and the qualities needed for leadership that are God-given, and they can be spotted early on, but I think they have to be nurtured. And I think you have to, as you go on that journey, try and improve on the giftings that God has given you and work them through. And to be honest, we are always learning. And so there's a sense in which we are being made as we learn. And in 15 years, I'm still learning, and I'm sure I'll go on learning. So it's been a journey, and exciting. So I think, yes, leaders are born and made. But what about you? Your experience of leadership. What would you say about being born or made? Do you think?
Yes. What's interesting is that I have never had this ambition in my life to become a leader. I never had a dream of becoming a leader. What I always, my dream has always been, since I was a teenager, or even earlier than that, maybe since I was a child, actually, my dream has always been, change. I always wanted to change the world and do something about that. And I really liked to work hard on that, and to take responsibility on what God has entrusted me with. But I never had this dream to become a leader. It
But
just
it's interesting,
happened.
isn't it? God obviously saw that, and I saw that in you from a very early stage when I started mentoring you. You had that vision. You wanted to do something to make a difference, and then you worked on it. So it's
That's
both.
true. That's true. So in a sense, I would say that being in a position of leadership is actually an undeserved opportunity to serve God through that, serve God and serve the others through that role.
Yes, yes.
Yes. So what would you say, thinking about your experience, your over 15 years experience, what would you say were the highlights of your leadership role with CARE?
I think there are so many, actually. My background was education, so I love developing people. So I think there are certainly highlights in seeing how members of staff have joined us, how we've been able to help them grow, develop their gifts, and use it for the ministry which we've been called to do, which in the United Kingdom is to influence the policies that are passed in Westminster and the other parliaments and assemblies, and bring a Christian voice into the public square, and to help individual Christians to work in that way as well. So I think certainly growing people is a highlight. I think a highlight as well is seeing the quality of the team we have, and when it comes together, it's very, very exciting. And even in the times when we haven't necessarily seen success in human terms, the way the team pulls together, prays together, has been just so exciting. And then I think, obviously, one of the highlights has to be when you see something come to fruition and you see, because of the dedicated service of people, that actually laws change. And I think in an age when we think we can't actually make a difference, we have seen that the situation can change under God, and that is so exciting.
Beautiful indeed, fascinating.
Yeah. So just thinking of you've before you came to CARE, you were leading in a smaller organisation, slightly different environment in Europe. When you look at your leadership there and now your leadership in CARE, what do you think leadership looks like? What does success look like in leadership terms?
I think that the way in which we tend to define success these days, and I'm thinking, particularly about the business model or the business environment, I think we have a tendency, a human tendency actually, to define success in terms of numbers, in terms of goals that we have achieved, in terms of clear outcomes, in terms of different achievements that we think we have had in terms of performance actually. But I thought about this a while ago, and I was wondering whether actually in God's eyes success maybe looks different than in our eyes, and maybe there are other unseen in a way, or not so clear to see outcomes of our work that are much more valuable in God's eyes than our numbers and our goals and our strategic plans. Of course, they are very valuable and important, but I think that being able to create an environment where relationships flourish, being able to empower people to fulfill God's calling in their lives, being able to create a safe space where people can share their opinions and concerns. I would call that success. So I would say that in an organization, the fact that relationships flourish, both in terms of human connection, but also in terms of our connection with God, that is success. Because wherever we look in the Bible, we are never promised success in the worldly terms. We are never promised that our businesses or our organizations will always be successful according to human standards. So there is something more to success than that.
Do you think there's something distinctive about success in leadership as well? That because leaders often have a vision, we would say hopefully it's a vision that's inspired by God and guided by God. Do you think success has to do with you've talked about people developing people and so on. Do you think success in leadership is when people catch that vision?
Oh, absolutely.
That perhaps you and I have. And other people, do you think that's an important element
absolutely,
as well?
Absolutely. Being able to look back and see that you're not alone there, and that your vision is not only your own, but there are at least a few others that come alongside and follow that vision. That's a beautiful and encouraging thing. And absolutely, I would call that as being success. How about I was thinking, of course, about empowering people. And I know that, well, I have experienced that myself. In CARE, there is a very positive culture, and people are encouraged and empowered. And that
I'm pleased you saw that when you came in, because that's what we're working towards.
So, and obviously, this type of culture comes from the leadership. It comes from you. So how did you nurture that type of culture? How did you make it flourish? What are the key ingredients to a positive culture in an organization?
I think there has to be something distinctive about a Christian organisation. I think there are general principles that apply in organisations as a whole as you're leading it, but I think distinctively there are distinctives for Christian organisations. And I would say that undergirding everything we do is prayer. And so praying about the way ahead, the vision, seeking God for it. But then there are very practical things about the recruitment of staff, getting the right staff, we've worked really hard at recruiting staff who've bought into the vision, who are with us on the issues and see it not just as a job, but actually a ministry and a mission. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't provide good working conditions for staff, and I think that's something that helps to nurture and foster that feeling that you're together in something. And I think we've been very, very blessed by having a staff who have bought into the vision. I think you have to constantly remember that there will be new staff who haven't perhaps been around for as long as I have, and one or two others have. And so we have to help them sometimes in understanding the vision and working through the implications of it. So it's the right staff, I think, in the right job, so that they are using the gifts that God has given them to the best of their ability. I'll perhaps say something a little bit controversial in the sense of saying, I think if you haven't got the right people who don't fit, you have to help them to move on. So I think there have been those difficult occasions when we've had to do that. But I think fostering that unity, having fun together, and I just love it when spontaneous things happen. And that helps as well. So I think it's a whole raft of things: recruiting well, training people well, being concerned about staff as people. So it's not just what they're doing. You're concerned about their lives, their families, these sorts of things. And yeah, helping to keep people focused on the main thing, which isn't always easy. And I think communication, therefore, is absolutely key. And I think if there's one thing that makes a big difference, it is communication. And it's the one thing, if I'm talking about myself, is probably one of the hardest things to do, because you don't get it right all the time. And people hear they don't necessarily hear what you think they hear, and perhaps they're not kept in the loop, and things like that can actually trip up along the way. Yeah.
And there's another ingredient that maybe you didn't mention, but I think it's important at CARE, and that's the CEO stories. Because
I have no idea what you're referring to.
Because you mentioned the personal interaction that you have with the team, and one of the things that I know that our team in CARE appreciates is your stories. Because once I even heard a comment from a colleague of ours saying that, Nola, where's my story for today? I didn't hear my story today. So that's really fostering positivity in the office.
Right, well, one of your important roles will be to tell me when they're fed up with my stories.
I don't think it will be the case soon.
Oh dear, okay. Yeah, so, I mean, we're both women. Do you think there's something specific about women in leadership positions? How do we, we're feminine. What about femininity? How do we do it? Is there something about women in leadership that's?
Well, obviously, leadership is leadership, and leadership principles are the same whether you're a woman or whether you're a man. But then, of course, women and men are different, and they have different styles of communicating and different styles of interacting. And what I have seen in the last years is the fact that keeping my femininity as a woman can become challenging in today's modern culture.
In what way? What do you?
I think that sometimes women in leadership face this pressure that they almost need to become men if they are in leadership, and they need to become tough, maybe. and they need to focus on certain aspects of their work because they are always surrounded by men. They are, women being in a leadership position in a world where mostly men are in leadership positions. And there is something challenging that comes to that. But I think that what is something that is extremely important in this particular aspect is to just be who we are.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yes.
Because we don't need to prove anything, do we? We don't need to, we're not in competition with anyone. We are just trying to do our best to fulfill the calling that God has for us. So we don't need to compete, we don't need to affirm ourselves, we don't need to be something that we are not. And I think that women have a special gift of nurturing people around them and encouraging and being very relational. And that's definitely something that I want to cultivate more and more in my life.
Yes.
What would you say about the topic?
Yes, I totally agree with you that it's leadership and it's not, specifically women in leadership. I do think there's something very important though about, one of the distinctive qualities of a Christian leader is that they're called by God. And they're called out of weakness. And I love the passage where Paul talks about God's chosen the foolish things of this world, and I take great comfort from that.
Me too.
But I think what I've observed in women who are in leadership is that sometimes they have very limited self-perception. They don't feel they can do it. They're not as good as men. And I think what you said is so valuable about we are who God has made us with gifts that he can use, and he has called us. And therefore I think that's something as women, we bring something very important to the table. I think there's a winsomeness. I'm not saying men can't be winsome, but when you get an attractive, I don't mean that in the wrong way, but an attractive, winsome woman who is on fire for the Lord, that says an enormous amount when you're going to places where people aren't Christian and perhaps quite hardened. They can relate in that way. And I do think we have done ourselves a disservice by trying to be who we're not and trying to be like men or even other women, and stepping out of the characters who we are. And I think sometimes women in leadership, certainly in a non-Christian era, but I've seen it amongst Christian women as well, come across as strident, trying to prove themselves. And we just have to be who God's made us. Our identity is in him. And I think learning that is a very long probably we have to do it all the time over. We'll never get there until we're with the Lord. But that's where our identity is, and that's where our confidence is, and that's something very precious that I think we have to hold on to.
Absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned a few minutes ago the fact that at CARE, and of course in other organizations as well, there is a huge emphasis on having the right people in the right positions, and of course something that you always work on is leadership and leadership principles and the right people in key leadership positions within CARE.
Yeah.
So how would you define a good leader? What are the characteristics of a good leader?
Well, first of all, if it's a Christian leader, it is that belief that they are called by God and that they rely on God to help them. I think a good Christian leader, therefore, has to cultivate their personal walk with God. And leadership, this is something that I think has been brought home to me recently, or in recent years particularly, that yes, we need to hone the skills that God has given us, but fundamentally a Christian leader leads well if it's coming from inside. and their relationship with God. And the real danger that we face in Christian organisations and Christian ministries is that we're doing the Christian stuff all the time. And so it's so easy not to safeguard that walk with God, our personal walk with God. And it's a constant challenge to me, and I think we have to do it. We have to intentionally do it. How we do that will differ from people to people, but we really have to do it. So certainly reliance on God. I think humility in the right way, admitting when you've got it wrong, the intention all the time to learn from others is something that's really, really important. I think emotional intelligence, vital. Perseverance, because it can be hard. I think courage. There are so many actually qualities, aren't there, that we need as leaders. I think yes, we have to have vision. We have to understand what's going on around us. And yes, that I think people skills are vitally important. But you also need that vision and that drive. That vision. I mean, God says, without a vision, the people perished.
Yes.
And of course, it's God's vision, but it's the one. What about you? Is there anything you'd add?
Well, I think that you touched on this before, but another element of I'm thinking of a good leader is the fact that a good leader is very passionate about developing people around him.
Yes.
And a good leader should intentionally invest in people around him on an ongoing basis, and seek to nurture those type of connections and relationships. A good friend of mine told me this week that we all need to have a Paul in our life, we all need to have a Barnabas in our life, and we all need to have a Timothy in our life.
Yes.
So we need to actively seek the Timothys in our lives as well, and to cultivate those type of relationships.
You're right. And a leader needs to look to the future.
Yes.
It's not the processy now. That you need those people.
Yes.
But it's the looking to the future and the planning and the investing in people, as you say.
Yes.
And certainly investing in a younger generation. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. It's interesting, isn't it? How do you empower those people around you? I mean, you said it's really important. Is it just training, or is there something else, do you think?
I think that empowering people is a quite complex type of work and concept.
Yes.
And of course, it has to do, and it needs to have to do with, providing training and, making sure that the people that we work with have the right skills. But there's much more to that. There's much more than training. As I've mentioned before, I think it's important for us as leaders to create a safe space where our colleagues can contradict us, they can challenge us, they can tell us if we are wrong, they can tell us, if there are aspects of our work that we don't realize or that we don't necessarily interpret in the right way. So we need to be open, to be challenged by the people that we work with, and we also need to give them credit for their work, to trust them with their work.
Trust them to make mistakes.
Absolutely,
I think, as well, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Because we all make mistakes.
Yes.
But we don't learn unless we do make those mistakes.
Yes. And give them the space to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. Because in the end, that leads to creativity.
Indeed.
They can become much more creative as a result of that process.
Yeah. I was just reflecting as well what we were saying, and obviously we've talked about a lot about leadership. I think it's also something we've sort of touched on, and you did just then, but I think to have someone outside of the organisation to whom you're accountable and who cares for you, I think that's really vital.
Absolutely. Having mentors, good mentors.
Yes.
That indeed keep you accountable, but also challenge you in different and various ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Speaking of that, of our outside support group, the concept of soul care is quite in fashion these days. And I could say it's quite in fashion these days at ELF.
Yes.
There are quite
really important.
There is a good number of seminars that have to do with the concept. So how would you define soul care, and what do you personally do to bring balance in your life?
It's difficult. I find it really difficult, actually. I think when you're doing something that you love, you're passionate about, it can consume everything. And in a sense, that's right. But I think it's important to intentionally have fun, spend time with friends, do things you enjoy. Obviously, it's incredibly important that you're plugged into a local church and you're involved with that. That's something that I find of immeasurable value. And cultivating that time, intentionally having that time with God. Just recently, I decided, as you know, and I'm not skiving, I do come in slightly later to the office than when I used to come in. And I have a long commute to the office. And it's because, I did talk to my board about this, but to spend time at the beginning of the day before I do anything else with the Lord is just so important. And it's very easy, particularly if you're doing a long commute or whatever, to let that go by the board. And that's something I think we have to be very intentional about. At times, it's wonderful, and you have those wonderful experiences. At other times, I think there's a discipline that comes in that we have to do. Yes.
So we need to make sure we set our priorities in the right way.
Absolutely.
And we need to make sure that we are very intentional with finding balance.
Yes. I have to say, I think we're beginning to draw this to a close, but I have to say, for me, you asked me at the beginning what really encourages me, and I think it's just so rewarding. We talked about the team, but it's a real testimony to ELF and how you've grown and the relationship that we have, and that now we're working together. And it's just such a privilege to be in leadership together, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's been the highlight of my last year, I must say.
Oh, that's great to hear.
And sometimes I can't believe how God brought this together, and it is a product of ELF, because we've had this relationship throughout the years, and I was so privileged to be mentored by you for 8 years, and then now we work together. It's just beautiful to see how that grew into this type of work.
It's a good example of leadership on both ways, though, because we learn from each other. So I've learned as much from you as hopefully, well, as you very kindly said, you've learned from me, but it's a journey. And it's fun. And I think in all the challenges, I think you'd agree, it's an adventure with God, isn't it?
Yes.
And we just want to make the organisation we work for, under God, with his help, the best place it can be. And we're accountable to God for that.
Yes, exactly. It's in the end, it's all about having the honor and the undeserved privilege to be partners with God in this type of work.
And even in the hard times when things don't go well, and there are those times, aren't there? And we have those challenges. I think the things that we've talked about are what help you get through, aren't they?
Yes.
And help the organisation get through.
Yes, exactly. Because if the foundation is laid correctly, and if the foundation is solid, then you're not shaken even if you have to face hard times. And that brings us back to your point about setting the right priorities and making sure that we are totally dependent on God and making sure that that's our number one priority.
Yes.
Everything else just flourishes out from that.
Yes. Well, it's great talking to you. And
the same here.
Really exciting. And our prayer is that as leaders together, as women leaders together, we will be good examples, and actually God will use us for his glory.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.